So good morning, everybody. Welcome. We are so pleased to have you all here in person today, as well as online. So we have a big crowd online right now, 43 persons strong. So it's really lovely to have you celebrate with us the end of the second year of the CAnD3 program. Of course, my name is Amélie Tenet-Vallée. I am the director. I have the privilege and the pleasure of being the director of CAnD3. And you don't see me right now, but I am smiling so broadly. The reason, of course, those of you in person know that I'm wearing a mask is that we had COVID kind of crash our party in not once, but twice. And so today we are keeping our safe distances, and also, unfortunately, as some of you already know, our plenary speaker is going to be speaking here remotely. But that's what we do at CAnD3. We're nimble, we roll with the punches, and we know how to make this work. So we are strong with that experience. And delighted to have you all here today. So sorry, we've got folks still streaming in, so I'm gonna have to pop this back down as people are coming in. Jumping into our introductions here, I first, of course, want to thank the partners, the many partners that are bringing you here today, fellows, as well as the making the experience available and possible of CAnD3, notably, of course, McGill and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Let me hide this. And puisque nous sommes ici rassemblés à McGill, je veux évidemment noter que l'Université McGill est sur un emplacement qui a longtemps servi de lieu de rencontre et d'échange entre les divers peuples de ce monde, les peuples autochtones, bien sûr, les nations Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabe. Et maintenant que nous vous invitons ici, fellows qui viennent à travers le Canada, les États-Unis, l'Angleterre, ainsi que maints autres pays, et virtuellement évidemment, nous sommes vraiment ravis de vous avoir ici, et que cet esprit d'échange qui nous anime soit également reflété dans le lieu sur lequel McGill se trouve et sur lequel Montréal se trouve. So to celebrate this engagement that we have together, I kind of want to take stock of the 2 years that have passed, and just give you a little bit of an overview, fast facts about CAnD3, all that's been achieved over the past 2 years. That's all just available and possible because of you, because of your participation, and because of our partners' commitment. So making it happen, it wasn't easy. We launched in a pandemic. But I guess we are a pandemic baby, so we are still figuring this out as we go. And so we are moving this out of the way. And we have 21 non-academic partners who are spending so much time, have been spending so much time delivering this program, designing this program, co-creating it with us, providing hundreds of thousands of dollars in in-kind time in internships and counting. Because some of you are still in internships, still engaging in internships. And, oops, excuse me, 16, I feel like I'm playing whack-a-mole here with people coming in, so I'll do this. So this is, for folks who are online, you don't know this, but as the minute that one of you comes in, I get a meeting, a popping up thing that happens. Anyway. 16 academic partners, so you are representing here these 16 institutions that are also committing extraordinary amounts of funding to your education in matching to what we offer here at CAnD3. And of course, what made it all possible, $2.5 million from SSHRC. And so we are in business, open and in business for at least 6 years. And so this is covering the whole period. We are convening a virtual community, of course, as we are now. So we are able to flip, as you saw, very rapidly, thankfully for that technology and all the developments that have been made available to us. There is at least that silver lining, right? We have 26 sessions of lunch and learns and connect to learns, 46 speakers from our network and beyond. almost 1,000 attendees. I think we've broken that mark today. So yay, we are beyond the past. We are past 1,000 attendees, not unique attendees. I feel like as a demographer, I have to say that these are not unique observations. They're repeat observations, but that's actually a fantastic mark of our network. 16 cameos. We're not really counting that super seriously, but we've had cats, dogs, and chicks, like, the little baby birds, not the inappropriate naming of a woman, 2 babies, and perhaps more along the way. And here, just pushing this over, 32 fellows, first cohort, second cohort that are some of them present here today, and 380 hours of remote training. This is not just per cohort, this is for over the 2 years, although it may have felt like that sometimes, I understand. We're trying to provide you with a lot of information there, and 162 hours of synchronous delivery, which has been masterfully delivered by our team, our superb team. So we have, of course, countless lines of R code that had to be debugged over 6 countries, spanning 10 different time zones. So at times, this has been, of course, a challenge for some of you to join us, and we are so grateful that you were able to do so. So just to give you a bit of a sense of the cohorts, so this was our first cohort of CAnD3 fellows. Of course, the ones that were willing to come with us on this adventure, we are so grateful for this pilot year that you were willing and able to join us. And some of you are here in person. And of course, we are hoping also with, strong with the learnings that we gathered from this year, that we will be able to have something also in person in June 2023. So already you can earmark that. Those of you who will be alumni by then, we hope to bring you all together. And certainly your showing up is testament to the fact that this is really something that it warms my heart to see you here. And so thank you for coming. It's really about you. And so I think already, as far as I'm concerned, this is a success. And so this is the second cohort, of course, the CAnD3 fellows, current CAnD3 fellows, just finishing now. So that ends it for CAnD3. And now I'm just going to move it over to our, sorry, I need to get my views in order right here. And if my computer, don't talk just yet, Miles, or maybe talk and we'll see if you can pop up. But right now my view is gone out. The window. Let's give it a second. So you guys online, you can probably see Miles, but we can't in person right now. So Miles, do you want to go ahead and give us?
Yes, certainly. Well, first, as we're getting
everything straight, and see if maybe that wakes up my computer.
Sure. Can you hear me?
You would.
Emily, can you hear me? Hi. Bob can hear me. Michaela?
Miles, you're muted.
I'm not muted on my end.
Unmute this. Sorry, I apologize. It was me.
That's
muted.
Okay.
Okay. We still can't see you. I kind of worry that I'm going to mess this up. So I'll just bring this down, stop sharing, and hopefully this will jog the computer back. Yes. There we go.
Okay. Can you see and hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, first, let me say that it's phenomenal to see everybody in the faculty club at McGill. I wish I was there with you, but next time around. I also wanted to just introduce myself briefly. I'm Miles Taylor. I'm the substantive chair at CAnD3. And for those of you current and former fellows, I just wanted to say again, what an amazing 2 years this has been. It's just been such a pleasure and so much fun to see this fellowship program take off. So on that note, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Dr. Bob Hummer. Dr. Robert Hummer is the Howard W. Odom Distinguished Professor of Sociology and Fellow of the Carolina Population Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Hummer served as the 2021 president of the Population Association of America, which is the 84th president of that organization. Dr. Hummer's research program is focused on the accurate description and more complete understanding of population health patterns and trends in the United States. He is currently serving as director of the long-running National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health. Those of us know it as AdHealth. Now it is in its 6th wave. I believe Bob is celebrating that, being kind of sent off. The AdHealth is one of the most innovative and well-utilized nationally representative cohort studies of Americans ever undertaken. Over his career to date, Professor Hummer has published more than 150 journal articles and book chapters in his area of interest, with attention to health disparities both during infancy and childhood and across the life course. One other additional accolade that I will note is that Bob is an FSU alumnus. And so I just wanted to point out that the CAND3 partnerships and international networks just continue to amaze me. So Dr. Hummer is going to be presenting race, ethnicity, racism, and population health and aging in the United States. Thanks, Bob.
Oh, thank you so much, Miles, for that kind introduction. It's much appreciated. And yes, I had a wonderful time at Florida State and still to this day give thanks to the training that I got there. It's really an honor to be giving this lecture today. Thank you, Miles, Emily, for inviting me, and to Ariane for all the organizational details. I'm really bummed I can't be there in person. I'm still recovering from COVID. I got it 11 days ago, and about mid last week, just didn't feel like I could fairly travel and not risk infecting a lot of people. So I apologize for that. I was actually stuck overseas until Sunday night. So I wish I could be there. I was looking forward to the trip, and hopefully I can travel again another time. But I really appreciate you having me here virtually. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this will work. And slideshow. And I'll check in with you all to see if that actually works. Great. Okay.
It works.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so over the past 3 years, U.S. society has experienced the tragic police killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and stark racial and ethnic disparities in sickness and death rates brought about by the COVID pandemic. Such tragedies have fed into the country's already poor population health profile and very wide health disparities. At the same time, some leading politicians have denied the existence of systemic racism in U.S. society, and others have proposed or helped pass laws to regulate what can and cannot be taught in schools with regard to race and racism. It is clear then that we are in a critical period for better understanding racial and ethnic disparities in health and other dimensions of social life in the United States. As such, it is perhaps as important as ever that the population sciences community weighs in and helps our society develop a better understanding of the issues and facts at hand, and to make sure that our research findings help educate our citizens and inform policy in the effort to create a better society for all of us. In this talk today, I'll make the case that the population sciences community, including all of us here today, has a central role to play in this critical area of societal concern. Our serious engagement on work in this area is of the utmost importance for at least 4 scientific reasons, as depicted on the left side. First, U.S. health is poor relative to other high-income countries, including Canada, and racial and ethnic health disparities are wide. Second, population scientists lead the way in describing these disparities, but that job is both very complex and is becoming increasingly difficult. Third, the population sciences community has fallen short in incorporating the concept and role of racism in understanding racial and ethnic health disparities. And fourth, U.S. society and all high-income societies around the world are rapidly aging. Moreover, some of our minority subgroups are aging more rapidly than the majority population. As such, it is critical to understand disparities in health and aging across subgroups in U.S. society in this rapidly changing compositional context. Beyond science, I also think we have moral reasons to engage in this area of work more so than ever before. Indeed, health disparity statistics are not simply numbers. Those numbers represent lost lives and human suffering for sizable groups of people. And there is profound injustice in such disparities that should demand our attention. We are also living in an age where denials of our country's history and entrenched thinking is threatening both scientific advancement and the education of our nation's young people. As such, in my view, the population sciences community has a moral obligation to engage in this area of research in the effort to help make the world a bit better place. Drawing on the above issues, my talk today is split into 3 sections. First, I'll note the major contributions that population scientists have made and should continue to make regarding the documentation of racial and ethnic disparities in US population health. Second, I will spend a good bit of my time today discussing the incorporation of racism into research on racial and ethnic disparities in population health and aging. Finally, my third section will demonstrate how I and a large team of my collaborators are creating a data resource, the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, or AdHealth, in the effort to better understand health and aging disparities in US society. And as such, we aim to help the policy and programmatic communities improve the nation's health and reduce its disparities. Let's begin with description. What are some of the important things we have learned, and what are some of our major challenges ahead? Racial and ethnic disparities in health cannot be understood without demographic tools and concerns. We carefully construct rates with concerns to both numerators and denominators, use statistical tools like standardization to take age differences across populations into account, and produce accurate life tables for the population as a whole and for its large subgroups. We design our studies to be representative of the population and give substantial attention to population heterogeneity within our data. We also pay obsessive attention to data quality and measurement issues and think about and measure time in the 3 dimensions of age, period, and cohort. And demographers are careful with regard to issues of causality. We employ causal modeling approaches only when the data and designs are appropriate and use causal language with care. When Aaron Hamilton and I were writing Population Health in America a few years ago, it was an easy choice for us to turn to the core tools and concerns of demography as our guides to best describe population health in our country. Indeed, the core tools and concerns of demography should, in my view, be central to the scientific understanding of racial and ethnic health disparities. Drawing on these core tools and concerns, I now show a few examples of critical facts we've learned about racial and ethnic health disparities. I will focus on 4 key contributions that the population sciences community has made. First, that disparities change across time by age, period, and cohort. Second, that disparities differ across contexts, both geographic and institutional. Third, disparities differ within groups. And fourth, disparities differ across measures of health. Focusing first on time, I concentrate narrowly on period-based change in this example and show estimates of life expectancy at birth for Black Americans and white Americans from 1900 to 2020. Over these 120 years, it is easy to see that Black Americans in blue live significantly shorter lives on average than white Americans in green. Most recently, using careful demographic techniques, Stephen Wolf, Ryan Masters, and Lawden Aaron showed that COVID-19 and increases in other causes of death reduced life expectancy of Black Americans by an estimated 3.3 years in 2020, compared with a 1.4-year reduction for white Americans. Most unjust and not shown on this graph, Black American males now have an estimated life expectancy of 67.7 years, which is 3 years lower than the estimated global life expectancy for all men. Tragically then, the current Black-white disparity of 5.8 years is also as large as it was in the early 1980s. This disparity reflects excess suffering and death among Black Americans that occurs far too early, year in and year out, as well as heartbreak, stress, and poorer health for decedents' family members, friends, and neighbors. Racial and ethnic health disparities are also exhibiting rapid change in other troubling ways. In the same paper just mentioned above, Wolf, Masters, and Aaron showed that life expectancy for Hispanic Americans declined by an estimated 3.9 years in 2020. In an earlier related effort, Rogelio Saenz and Mark Garcia showed that increasing older adult death rates among Hispanic Americans have largely erased their advantage in longevity relative to whites that had existed for decades. And while the 2020 estimate of life expectancy for American Indians or Alaska Natives has not yet been published due to data quality issues, it is likely to exhibit a substantial decline from 2019 as well, given their COVID-related health toll that has been documented by Aggie Yellowhorse, Kimberly Heiser, and colleagues. Second, demographers have also shown that racial and ethnic disparities in population health vary substantially across contexts. In the example here, published recently by Benjamin Sosnad, Black-white disparities in neonatal mortality, first month for death in the first month of life, are ubiquitous in every state with enough data to estimate them, while also exhibiting substantial variation. On the left side, for example, neonatal mortality rates are lower, and Black-white disparities are smaller in the states of Washington and Minnesota compared with the rest of the country. On the right side, though, neonatal mortality rates are higher, and Black-white disparities are especially large in Michigan, North Carolina, and Delaware, respectively. Such careful description across contexts helps point to the institutions and policy regimes that are either more or less conducive for population health outcomes and disparities. In this case, Sosnad shows that neonatal mortality rates and disparities seem to be especially sensitive to cross-state inequalities in access to and quality of medical care at the time of birth. Third, demographers have also long been obsessed with population heterogeneity, even coining a cute phrase for it, quote, broken down by age and sex. But we have also shown that population heterogeneity goes well beyond age and sex, not only in terms of the dimensions of identity under consideration, but also the complexity of meaning underlying such heterogeneity. This figure shows, for example, estimates of life expectancy at birth developed by Gopal Singh and colleagues for racial and ethnic groups stratified by nativity. Life expectancy at birth is higher among the foreign-born segment of each group, with an especially wide difference for Black Americans. Such findings clearly illustrate that estimates of racial and ethnic disparities in health must be sensitive to the immigrant composition of each group, and that the immigrant and native-born components of each group should be separately considered in analyses, if at all possible. Finally, demographers have also made enormous contributions to the accurate documentation and understanding of racial and ethnic health disparities by incorporating the multidimensionality of human health in our toolbox. Throughout the COVID pandemic, for example, our field has focused on producing accurate infection and cause-specific death rates by race, ethnicity, age, sex, geographic area, and more. This disease-specific focus has been critically important in understanding which groups COVID-19 is affecting most significantly and how policy and programmatic solutions should be tailored. Over the last 2 decades, our field has also pioneered the collection and analysis of biomarkers of health in population-based studies. Such efforts have facilitated detection of health disparities and trends prior to the emergence of disease or death, such as in young adulthood. Likewise has been our relatively recent attention to the measurement of cognitive and physical functioning measures in field-based population health studies, which is and will be critical for years to come with the aging of the population. This graph, drawn from work by Mark Hayward and colleagues published a few years ago, illustrates just one example of how our community has focused on the complexity of health to learn new facts about racial and ethnic health disparities. The numbers at the top of each bar show life expectancy at age 50. Foreign-born and US-born Hispanic women exhibited life expectancy at age 50 that was higher than or similar to their white counterparts. Note that these data were prior to the onset of COVID-19. However, unhealthy life expectancy at age 50, which is measured by average years lived with a disability and is in checkered markings for each group, is substantially higher for both US and foreign-born Hispanics compared with white women, perhaps largely due to the physical wear and tear that intense manual labor takes on the knees, backs, and hips of Hispanic and Black adults relative to whites. Thus, it is easy to see from this example that longer life does not always correspond with better health. As I hope I conveyed, our descriptive work is extraordinarily important and very challenging. Moreover, it is getting even more challenging. This slide, for example, shows that despite heroic efforts on the part of the US Census Bureau to count the 2020 population in the context of COVID-19 and with unprecedented political intrusion from the Trump administration, there were sizable undercounts of Black, Hispanic, and American Indian individuals and overcounts of Asian and white individuals. Such coverage errors not only may result in the loss of political representation and money for subgroups most affected, but will also pose serious challenges for demographers in the coming decade, including the estimation of accurate US mortality rates and the development of sampling frames for national surveys. Finally, this slide also lists just a few other ongoing challenges as we attempt to provide the scientific community, policymakers, and the public with accurate information on racial and ethnic disparities in health. For example, declining response rates in our national surveys, discussed in the recent report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine pictured on this slide, poses an enormously challenging problem for which we need innovative researchers from the population sciences community to help solve. Other continued major descriptive challenges include our changing population composition, continued shifts in racial and ethnic identity, the difficulty in collecting data from small and hard to reach groups, and changes in the health landscape of the country. Far too often over the years, I've heard that scientific work on racial and ethnic health disparities needs to move beyond description and focus on explanation. Such dismissal of description, in my opinion, is a big mistake. Indeed, a key strength of demography is obsession with getting the facts right. As such, I urge researchers, funding agencies, and journal editors to continue to devote serious time and resources toward the accurate description of racial and ethnic health disparities, and particularly so in a rapidly changing and complex societies where data are far from perfect. Indeed, accurate description necessarily precedes explanation and effective action. The second major point of my talk is that the population sciences field has lagged in efforts to incorporate racism as a scientific and measurable concept in the study of health disparities. That's partially due to the complexity of the concept of racism, but is also due to our own collective neglect. That needs to change. Indeed, it has only been in the last 3 years, since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's tragic killing, and since COVID unfolded, that many of our country's powerful scientific funding agencies, professional associations and journals, universities, and think tanks have seriously begun to engage with racism as a scientific and measurable construct. Fortunately, we are not starting from scratch in this effort. Over 120 years ago, W.E.B. Du Bois pioneered the study of racial disparities in health and mortality in the United States and provided empirical evidence on the racism-induced social conditions giving rise to such disparities in Philadelphia and other cities around the country. Efforts to incorporate racism as a or the potential explanation for racial and ethnic disparities in health has slowly gained steam in the population sciences over the last 30 years. Key contributions from social demography and social epidemiology include, but are not limited to, Thomas Levi's work on political empowerment, Arlene Geronimus's development of the weathering hypothesis, Doug Massey and Nancy Denton's work on the development of US racial residential segregation, David Williams and Chiquita Collins's conceptualization of racial residential segregation as a fundamental cause of health, Hayward Derek Horton's development of the critical demography paradigm, Nancy Krieger and Gil G's incorporation of racism into theories of population health, and Tukufu Zaberi's work on racialized statistics. All of these scholars have pushed the population sciences along in many key ways in this area. Perhaps most important, their work has strengthened the idea that racism is a multi-level, multi-institutional, historical, and contemporary concept, and that racism, not racial and ethnic identity, is the driving force behind racial and ethnic health disparities. But our collective efforts have not been as aggressive or impactful as they could or should have been, especially given the long-term and ongoing disparities I outlined above. Building on such a foundation, our current collective challenge is clear to me. We must incorporate the concept and measurement of racism in all steps of the research process on health disparities. This includes in the questions we ask and the theories and literature we draw upon, to the hypotheses we propose, to the data we collect, the measures we construct, and the analytic tools we use, and to the implications we draw from our findings. And we must do so with diverse research teams. Thankfully, recent high-level decisions at the National Institutes of Health have finally made such serious funding for such work in the United States possible. Measurement-wise, David Williams, Maggie Hicken, Bridget Gooseby, and their colleagues have pioneered ways to incorporate measures of individual-level discrimination into large-scale studies of population health. More recently, such individual-level measures have been expanded to include vigilance, anticipatory discrimination, vicarious discrimination, lack of trust in institutions, and reports of victimization and exposure to violence. These measures tap into the tolls that individuals experience by thinking about, preparing for, and dealing with everyday racist encounters, and have been shown to exhibit important influences on a number of physical and mental health outcomes. Other leading scholars, including Hetty Lee, Rachel Hardiman, Taylor Hargrove, Chantel Martin, and Tyson Brown and Patricia Holman, have begun to develop and incorporate measures of structural racism into longitudinal studies of individual-level health. For example, in a paper presented at the 2021 meeting of the Population Association of America, Tyson Brown and Patricia Holman conceptualized and developed state-level measures of structural racism using an array of data sources. They linked such measures to individual-level data and estimated their effects on the individual-level health of US Black and white adults. Their work documented pervasive levels of racism across all US states, but that such levels also vary across states. Moreover, they showed that higher levels of structural racism are associated with a number of worse health outcomes for Black Americans, but not white Americans. Inspired by the momentum in this research area described above, I now turn to the ways that a large group of collaborators and myself at UNC are trying to move this work forward. I begin with my latest conceptual framework for understanding race, ethnicity, racism, and population health in American society, with the hope that such a framework can help stimulate and organize research work in this area. At UNC, I'm especially indebted to my wonderful colleague, Kathy Harris, who has been instrumental in my thinking about the conceptualization of health disparities as they play out across generations, over the life course, and in context. I also draw on the work of many other scholars in this portrayal, including David Williams, Arlene Geronimus, Paula Braveman, your own Alexis Dennis, and Tyson Brown and Patricia Holman. I'll then show a simple example of empirical work in this area using available data from AdHealth. To start, I depict the individual level relationship between racial and ethnic identity and physical and mental health across the life course, which is the bedrock of descriptive work in this area and should remain so, as I discussed earlier. Importantly, I define race and ethnicity as socio-historical constructs that vary across time and place. They are constructed and maintained by dominant social groups in order to restrict and protect valued societal resources, including power, privilege, money, and education. Here, I have combined the concepts of race and ethnicity into an ethno-racial construct. Importantly, racial and ethnic groups are not biologically based categories. Instead, they reflect the socio-historical constructs of race and ethnicity as they currently exist in US society. Second, I indicate that the relationship between race, ethnicity, and health is likely to vary across other dimensions of identity, such as immigration status, skin tone, religious identity, and more, as I noted above with regard to heterogeneity. As a side note, these dimensions of identity are also linked to their own systems of oppression, which for time and complexity's sake, I do not address here. Third, I depict the important mediating role that socioeconomic resources play in helping to produce racial and ethnic disparities in health. Over the years, much work in the population sciences has developed estimates of the extent to which socioeconomic resource inequities explain racial and ethnic health disparities. Such work is especially important in pointing to key policy levers that, if implemented, could help close disparities. Fourth, the framework shows that beyond socioeconomic resources, other social, psychological, and behavioral factors serve as important individual level mechanisms by which racial and ethnic disparities in health are created. For example, greater exposure to stressors, such as higher levels of child and family loss, have been shown to help explain racial and ethnic health disparities, as demonstrated in recent work by Deborah Umberson and colleagues. The two-way arrows between these mechanisms in health show that there may also be important interrelationships that unfold between them, making the collection and use of longitudinal data all the more important in understanding the development of racial and ethnic disparities in health across the life course. Fifth, and most important, this framework specifies that systemic racism, not racial and ethnic identity, is the driving force that works to create racial and ethnic disparities in health across the life course. I borrow from David Williams and colleagues and define systemic racism as, in quotes, an organized social system in which the dominant racial group, based on an ideology of inferiority, categorizes and ranks people into social groups called races and uses its power to devalue, disempower, and differentially allocate valued societal resources and opportunities to groups defined as inferior. I use the term system here intentionally. Indeed, the United States structure and culture of laws, policies, institutions, and meanings were created by European origin colonists to create wealth and hoard power, status, and well-being. To do so, they oppressed and exploited the American Indian and Black populations, initially through genocide, forced migration, and slavery. Those actions and institutions were later replaced by the institutionalization of Jim Crow laws, political disenfranchisement, residential segregation, mass incarceration, and state-sanctioned violence. Along the way, Hispanic, Asian American, and other racial and ethnic minority populations have also been subjugated to some of these same oppressive practices, as well as others unique to their social histories, as your new faculty member, Alexis Dennis and colleagues have eloquently laid out in a recent paper published in Ethnicity and Disease. Finally, this framework makes the case that systemic racism influences health because it damages the structural and cultural context in which we live, the laws and policies that govern us, the educational and economic context within which we attend school and work, the social context within which we reside, shop, recreate, and live out our daily lives, and the cultural context that define who and what is valued and meaningful in society. As you may imagine, measuring all these dimensions of racism is very difficult. Given this conceptualization, though, it is clear that we can't limit our measurement of racism to individual level discriminatory thoughts, attitudes, language, and behaviors, as important and damaging to health as they may be. Instead, conceptualizing racism as social system means digging into the structure and culture of society to best understand and develop ways to measure these long-term but evolving contextual dimensions of life that create the opportunities and constraints within which we all live. With such a framework in mind, I now turn to a basic empirical illustration of how I and hopefully others could use it as a guide to better understand racial and ethnic disparities in health. I will address the following questions. First, how wide are racial and ethnic disparities in just one key measure of aging-related health, allostatic load, among US adults? Second, to what extent are such disparities explained by racism-induced inequities in the economic context in which individuals lived as adolescents? And third, to what extent are such disparities further explained by racism-induced educational attainment inequities across groups? To answer these questions, I use data from AdHealth, the design of which is portrayed here. This figure, which depicts time or wave of data collection from the mid-1990s in the top row to the present time in the bottom row, shows that AdHealth is a longitudinal study of 20,745 adolescents in the blue box in the center at the top, who were in grades 7 through 12 during the 1994-95 school year. And they have been followed for 5 waves of data collection to date, with a 6th wave in progress. Over the last 25 plus years, AdHealth has collected rich survey data from participants and their parents, a vast array of contextual data from participants' schools, social networks, and geographies of residence, assorted administrative data, and in-home physical and biological data, including anthropometric measures, genetic markers, blood-based assays, and medications. In the following empirical exercise, I will narrowly focus on the roughly 3,000 US-born Black and white female respondents who contributed Wave 5 biomarker data at ages 33 to 43, simply to reduce complexity. The aging-related health outcome used here, allostatic load, is conceptualized as the cumulative wear and tear on the body due to repeated activation of the stress response. As such, it is an under-the-skin assessment of multi-system health that provides a useful indicator of how well groups of people are aging as they move through the life course. Here, I use allostatic load. Here I measure allostatic load using biomarker and anthropometric data collected during wave 5, supplemented by respondents' reports of medication use and diagnoses related to the cardiovascular, endocrine, renal, and immune systems. The allostatic load score ranges from 0 to 13, with 0 indicating the best possible health and 13 the worst. The mean score is 3.6. This figure shows mean allostatic load scores at wave 5 at average age 38 for US-born Black and white women. We see that even before the onset of middle age, Black women have on average an allostatic load score about 1 point higher than white women. Similar to all-cause mortality rate disparities across racial groups exposed to vastly different histories of advantage and oppression, this disparity to me captures racism, not race, that is playing out in the bodies of Americans. Next, I turn to the residential context structured by systemic racism within which members of different racial and ethnic groups live during adolescence. In their classic book, American Apartheid, Doug Massey and Nancy Denton demonstrated that racial and ethnic patterns of geographic residence in the United States have long been structured by racist policies, programs, and actions that have led to high levels of segregation and unequal opportunity for Americans' socioeconomic attainment and well-being. Here, I use a measure of adolescent neighborhood opportunity context, drawn from the Opportunity Atlas developed by Raj Chetty and colleagues that Lauren Gaydosh, Taylor Hargrove, and Kathy Harris have linked to AdHealth respondents. This measure is based on respondents' census tract of residents and adolescents from the 1990s. It provides us with an estimate that an individual living in that tract has a probability of living in the census tract with a poverty rate of less than 10% in adulthood. I dichotomized the measure at the median. One half of AdHealth respondents were grouped into higher opportunity neighborhood contexts, while one half were grouped into lower opportunity contexts. This figure shows a stark disparity in opportunity context. As adolescents, just 12% of Black women in AdHealth lived in a higher opportunity context. This contrasts with 54% of white women. At the same time, please keep in mind that for the relatively few Black adolescents who live in so-called higher opportunity contexts, the everyday stresses and strains of doing so may also be pronounced, given their small numbers in what are largely white-dominated spaces. Thus, living in a higher opportunity context during adolescence may not be associated with the same opportunities for Black individuals relative to their white counterparts. This next slide examines allostatic load scores by adolescent opportunity context for Black and white women, respectively. For Black women on the left side, there is no statistically significant difference in allostatic load score when comparing those who lived in lower versus higher opportunity tracts in adolescence. But for white women on the right side, the story is quite different. Those who lived in higher opportunity contexts in adolescence exhibit better health than their counterparts who lived in lower opportunity contexts in adolescence. To put it in another way, the opportunity structure seems to be working much better for white women relative to Black women. So I lastly turn to the racial disparities in allostatic load, stratified by both adolescent residential opportunity contexts and educational attainment. The left side of this figure shows that Black women with less than a college degree have higher mean allostatic load scores across both contexts, in dotted blue and dotted orange, respectively, relative to their highly educated counterparts in solid blue and solid orange, respectively. This is perhaps especially so for those who lived in a higher opportunity context during adolescence, those in dotted orange. Indeed, the very high mean allostatic load score of 5.80 for less educated Black women who lived in a high opportunity context as adolescents, albeit with a wide confidence interval given their small numbers, may suggest the intense racism-induced stresses of living and interacting in largely white spaces, and perhaps particularly so for those who do not end up obtaining a high level of education. An upside to the patterns here is that Black women who lived in either low or high opportunity contexts as adolescents and who obtained a college education, those in solid blue and solid orange respectively, exhibit the lowest mean allostatic load scores, 3.6 and 3.7 respectively, consistent with the idea that higher educational attainment is a fundamental cause of better health. Nonetheless, living in a high opportunity context, at least as experienced by Black American adolescents in the 1990s, does not seem to offer any additional adult health benefits for college educated women compared to those who lived in a lower opportunity context in adolescence. The right side of the figure shows that mean allostatic load scores for white women are considerably lower, and especially for those who lived in high opportunity contexts in adolescence and obtained a college education, those in solid orange with a mean score of 2.19. Thus, it appears that a combination of high opportunity context in adolescence and obtaining a college education is especially beneficial for the adult health of white women. To put it simply, the system seems to work much better for white adults in comparison to Black adults. And recall that a majority of white women, 54%, lived in a high opportunity context in adolescence. But turning back to Black women, remember that the story is very different. 88% lived in a lower opportunity context in adolescence. Those who overcome such disadvantage and earned a college degree in solid blue exhibit better health than their low educated counterparts from low opportunity neighborhoods. But even so, their mean allostatic load score of 3.6 is equal to the overall mean of 3.6, suggesting a good amount of wear and tear along the way. And for those who grow up in low opportunity neighborhoods and do not earn a college degree, in dotted blue, mean allostatic load score at age 38 of 4.77 is strongly suggestive of poor midlife and older adulthood health for years to come. Again, only a small fraction of Black women, 12%, lived in a high opportunity context as adolescents, and while going on to achieve a college degree is associated with better health than their lower educated counterparts, an average of 3.7 in solid orange, the health benefits may not be nearly as strong as their highly educated white counterparts, also in solid orange. I provided the above illustration not as a polished analysis. It includes limited measures of the contexts of racism, does not include a longitudinal analysis of health changes across the life course, and narrowly focuses on US-born Black and white women simply to make the story digestible. What I hope the illustration does show is that conceptualization of racism as systemic and life course measurement of racism-induced spatial and educational inequities has the potential to yield better understanding of racial and ethnic health disparities. I certainly hope that more methodologically savvy researchers will move well beyond the basic illustration I've depicted here, and will do so with both a larger range of groups and longitudinally, so that science in this area will be pushed forward. In the last section of my talk, I now turn to the ways that my team and I are innovating in this area of study with the design and content of Wave 6 of Ad Health, something to hopefully look forward to in the next few years. Our goal is that Wave 6 of Ad Health, as well as subsequent waves, will provide the scientific community with a valuable resource for studying racial and ethnic disparities in health and the role of racism in the health and aging processes for many years to come. Ad Health was initially developed in response to a 1993 congressional mandate to fund a longitudinal study of adolescent health. A team of researchers at UNC, led by Dick Udry and Peter Bierman, submitted a proposal, got it awarded, and the project began in 1994 with primary funding from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, or NICHD. As initially conceived, Ad Health was going to simply be two waves of data to be conducted in 1994 and 1995, respectively. But with encouragement from NICHD and innovation from Dick Udry and Kathy Harris, it evolved into a multi-wave design in the early 2000s. Later, Kathy Harris, who became director in 2004, substantially ramped up the biological content of the data and got it funded as the cohort transitioned into adulthood. Thus, while it was originally called the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, it was renamed the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health when Wave 5 was funded in 2014. In 2016, Ad Health was the recipient of the 2016 Golden Goose Award from the US Congress, which makes this award based on seemingly obscure scientific studies that end up laying golden scientific eggs. Indeed, in recent years, nearly a published paper a day is produced using AdHealth data. Most recently in 2021, I took over as director of AdHealth when my team's proposal for Wave 6 was funded, this time primarily by the National Institute on Aging, or NIA. The new funding agency signifies the commitment by the National Institutes of Health to provide the resources to turn AdHealth into an even longer-term study of aging with a central focus on health disparities. AdHealth is exceptionally unique compared to many population-based studies of health, and as such, it provides the scientific community with the opportunity to study health and social life across the life course, starting in adolescence and now extending into early middle age. Indeed, AdHealth includes prospectively collected data on social, economic, and health experiences since adolescence, includes biomarker, anthropometric, other biological data, and cognitive data before many health outcomes manifest, and contains very rich data from multiple levels: cellular, individual survey, and contextual data. AdHealth also includes an intergenerational component. It includes parental data from adolescents and, for some parents, in older adulthood. I've been particularly enthralled by AdHealth data because it facilitates analysis of health disparities. The data includes substantial racial and ethnic diversity, a wide socioeconomic status distribution, rich data on gender identity and sexual orientation, and substantial geographic distribution. And not only is the data set large, but it is also nationally representative of the US population of adults who were in middle and high school during the 1994-95 school year. Focusing on Wave 6, our goal, now we're in the field, is to collect and disseminate high quality data on the life course determinants and trajectories of health behavior, and health disparities among this large representative cohort of Americans aging into midlife. As noted earlier, we now conceptualize AdHealth as an aging study. We are maintaining longitudinal integrity while innovating in a number of key ways, including the following. First, we have an intense focus on health and aging disparities across racial and ethnic, socioeconomic, sex, and gender groups. This involves in both survey design and content, and in terms of the kinds of contextual data we are appending to individual level respondents. Second, we are giving substantial attention to issues of stress among adults in their 40s on work, caregiving, chronic stress, and discrimination. Third, we're giving substantial attention to behavioral health, including drug and alcohol use. Fourth, we're continuing attention on cardiometabolic health as well, including issues of obesity, hypertension, and diabetes. Fifth, we have a new and intense aging-related focus on cognitive and physical and sensory functioning, which is very unique for cohort studies as young as AdHealth. And sixth, we're continuing to collect rich data from participant birth and death records in the effort to make this data set as rich as possible across the full life course. Keep in mind that there is no full life course study of health in the United States. Our data collection effort, again, includes a survey as the core data collection tool. A majority of respondents will take it on the web, while others will take it in person. To facilitate the study of aging, we are collecting both web-based and in-person-based cognitive, sensory, and physical functioning data. Our effort also includes the building of contextual data files corresponding to individuals' geographies of residence. We will be conducting a home exam within which we are collecting blood, anthropometric, and medications data, and we'll continue our collection of birth and death records. We are aiming for Wave 6 data releases in 2025. Importantly, our investigative team will have no early access to the data. We will get it the same day as you get it. It is truly an effort for the public scientific good. Design-wise, we have carefully developed a design consisting of two subsamples. Sample one is largely web-based with non-response follow-up, NRFU, to be done in person. The goal is for 10,256 completed sample one surveys, about 8,700 via the web, and these are fairly cheap ways to collect survey data, and that's why we're doing it that way, and 1,500 in-person NRFU respondents. The NRFU effort will focus especially on subgroups of the population who are less responsive to the web-based survey. So we're going to invest a lot of money in those, for example, with limited internet access and low-income participants. Sample 2 on the right side is in person. The survey questions will be the same as sample 1, but the in-person effort will also include cognitive assessments, physical strength, and sight, hearing, and olfactory measures. These will also to facilitate analysis of racial and ethnic disparities of these innovative measures. Sample 2 will be approximately 1/4 Black, 1/4 Hispanic, 1/4 Asian, and 1/4 white to facilitate disparities research on these key aging-related measures. In our development of the Wave 6 survey instrument for both Sample 1 and Sample 2, we've intentionally enriched content in key domains related to race, racism, and health, as discussed in the conceptual framework above, including multiple measures of race and skin tone, and individual level reports of experiences with different forms of discrimination, chronic stressors, experiences with violence and interactions with the criminal justice system, and a battery on trust in institutions. And as also emphasized above in the conceptual framework, we'll be adding important contextual data coinciding with Wave 6, with critical attention to the role of systemic racism in influencing the production and maintenance of racial and ethnic health and aging disparities. Included in the contextual domains we plan to amass and append are those focusing on political and legal contexts, educational and economic contexts, social and health contexts, and cultural contexts. In doing so, we hope to provide the scientific community with a key resource for the understanding of race, ethnicity, racism, health, and aging for years to come. All three survey types, the web-based, the NERFU, and the in-person, will also attempt to obtain participant consent for a home exam. You can see the different rates expected for each. The total number of consents for home exams we expect to send to our examination company during Wave 6 is nearly 10,000. And of those, we anticipate completing about 7,500 home exams. These exams will include anthropometric measures, blood pressure measurement, a blood draw, and a medications inventory. We're also leaving behind a microbiome self-collection kit to be returned by participants. So in short, we'll have a lot of biological data coming in from those who consent to the home exams. As you can see on one of these final slides, the home examinations will result in a large array of biological and clinical data for analysts. Most innovatively in Wave 6, we will be testing for COVID-19 exposure and neurocognitive measures that predict Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. This is in addition to our battery of standard assays that AdHealth has been conducting over the years. We will also have archived blood samples for future use by researchers with innovative ideas. Timeline is such that we are now in the field. Our pilot, which is one state of the United States, is we started 2 weeks ago, and we've got an N of around 100 right now. So we started. We're not there yet, but we're on our way. We'll be collecting most of our data between 2022 and 2024 with the home exams throughout, and again, the data dissemination in 2025. If you're ever interested in using AdHealth data, there's two ways to use them. We have restricted use data, which are through contract, and faculty members can help students get the data through the restricted use contracts. And then we have access a smaller public use files that you could download this afternoon and start using AdHealth data as well. We have a staff member that helps people get access to the data. So we're happy to, Jen Groner is happy to help with that at any point in time. So just look at this web link and we'll get you going. In conclusion, conceptualizing, measuring, and understanding the effects of systemic racism in U.S. population health and aging is undoubtedly very challenging. But it's a challenge I think we need to take on in order to create better public policy, develop more effective health interventions, and reduce or eliminate our longstanding, unjust, and harmful health and functioning disparities. While some may think it's a stretch, I draw a parallel to the Human Genome Project, the decades-long, multi-billion-dollar project which mapped humans' genetic makeup with the results meant to help improve health and well-being for all. Conceptualizing and measuring racism and modeling its impact on population health and aging outcomes across the life course is arguably an equally challenging endeavor, given the political, legal, social, economic, and cultural complexity of our society and how such contexts vary across both time and space. This work is not going to be complete in a year or two or with a few funded projects. Rather, conceptualizing, measuring, and modeling racism, understanding its effects on health and aging, and implementing effective solutions will require a significant and sustained attention and investment of time, money, and sweat that is only getting started, but in my view, will be well worth the effort. Indeed, doing so will help us better understand a very important portion of our societal DNA, and it will also help us in efforts to eliminate health and aging disparities by targeting social systemic changes rather than medical or pharmaceutical interventions. In closing, I again thank the many incredible people who have helped me with this presentation over the past 6 months, especially Alexis Dennis, Stephanie Hernandez, Fatima Tuma, Reed DeAngelis, Janet Scott, and Mel Kramer. And finally, I acknowledge the generous financial support from NIA, NICHD, and other institutes and offices at NIH that make science like this possible. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Bob, and I hope that you heard and saw the thunderous applause here. It feels so nice to have it actually in person. It's been a while for me. I know many of you went to PA, but this was a first in very, very many months for me. So thank you very, very much for that talk. Wide-ranging perspectives. I think you can count on getting some more requests and some more of those papers coming out of Ad Health, because I saw a lot of scribbling down here. I'm like, gonna look into this. So I'm sure the fellows picked up on this. We do have 2 questions in the chat. I want to invite folks in the audience here in person as well to prepare your questions. We're going to ask you to come up to the mic here. And I'm gonna step away, but just so the speaker can see you and that others in the room can hear you well. So I will first ask Elham, who is one of our fellows, to introduce herself, tell us about her affiliation, and then ask her question online. So she will be shortly spotlighted.
Yeah.
Hi, Elham. Yes, there you go.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Hummer, for that enlightening talk. I really enjoyed it. I'm a 4th-year doctoral student at Florida State University, and I'm studying urban planning. And actually, it's very similar along the lines to what you're studying. I'm studying the relationship between race and health outcomes in certain urban areas that are more transit rich, and to see what the differences are. So I was very drawn to that bar chart that you had, that you were comparing the high opportunity residential areas versus the low opportunity residential areas. And I was wondering how you differentiated, what were the measures that you used, and is it a fine line between these 2 types of areas? And also, is it just the UNC students that can possibly access the Ad Health data, or other students as well? Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome, Elham, and thank you for the comments. I really appreciate it. And so in terms of accessing the data, let me take that easy one first. No, that Ad Health data, we've literally got users all over the world, thousands and thousands of users. So the restricted data is the best Ad Health data. It includes all of the N is the full N, access to all the variables in all the data sets, hundreds of data sets we actually have. So it's there is the public use data. It's much smaller. You could analyze that this afternoon if you want, by going to ICPSR and downloading it and signing a form and saying you'll treat the data with confidentially and begin using it. But I would recommend the restricted use data because it's better, it's bigger, it's fuller, and so forth. That is through contract. I have an Ad Health contract. Anybody who uses it needs an Ad Health contract, and it's you'd have to have a faculty member sponsor you in that contract. So the contracts go to faculty members rather than students. But most faculty are willing to do that. I believe the Pop Center at Florida State, I think somebody has, maybe Kathy Tillman has a contract there, but there's students who are using the AdHealth data at Florida State through restricted use contract. So they're available, they're out there, and you can get access to them through a faculty member. Okay, going back to your question about the, Kathy just said, yes, she does have a contract. So thank you, Kathy. Going back to your question about the opportunity context. So what this is, again, it's based on where adolescents resided in the mid-1990s when they first were surveyed in AdHealth. So we have their address at that particular time. And the Opportunity Atlas data that we've brought in from Raj Chetty and colleagues, based on the census tract of residents of where they lived at that point in time, there's a probability. So Chetty and colleagues have said, okay, for every census tract in the United States, what's the probability based on where people lived in the 1990s that they'll live in a low poverty tract when they're adults, like 20 years later? And so we know that, okay, based on, if I'm an AdHealth member, based on where I lived in the mid-1990s, I have a high probability of living in a low poverty tract or a low probability. So we have based on the Chetty data, there's a probability of how likely it is that people will live in basically a rich neighborhood or a poor neighborhood. So it's like, how much mobility is there in that particular tract where people are living in adolescence? So I simply dichotomized that measure for this exercise, like put half the people in lower opportunity tracts and half the people in higher opportunity tracts, but it's based on what the data, there's probabilities in the data. So it's you could do other things with it besides dichotomize it.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you very much. So do we have questions in the room? Someone wanting to ask a question in the room? Okay, while you mull this over, we do have questions online. So Claire Kadar-Sibiot would be next. If you want to unmute, turn on your camera so we can spotlight you, Claire. Giving it a second. No, maybe not. Yes, go ahead. Vas-y.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. And actually, I would have loved not to be spotlighted because my question is very genuine and perhaps ridiculous. So I hope not. I'm a geriatrician and a researcher, and I would like to focus more on disparities. And so I'm very interested, and I'm also very interested in the cohort you presented in. And as also I'm working on dementia. Anyway, I'm very interested. But my question was, are all racial, ethnic health disparities attributable to systemic racism or not? Is it a stupid question? And if it's not, and what about socioeconomic status? And if the answer is not yes, how do we disentangle what is from systemic racism? And how do we also account on past systemic racism and generational systemic racism?
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. It's not a silly question at all. I think it's something that's very challenging to understand. Maybe let me take the easy part of that first in terms of socioeconomic status. So my conceptualization is hopefully depicted in that diagram I showed you kind of halfway through the talk or so. Thinks about socioeconomic status basically on the pathway, if you will, between racism and health. So, for example, depending on, opportunity structure, some people and some groups have much more opportunities than others to, for example, get high levels of education or transmit wealth across generations, and so on. So when I and others, I think there's a pretty good consensus, I would say, in the field, when I and others think about modeling socioeconomic status as an explanation for racial and ethnic disparities in health, I really see it as a pathway of racism rather than like a competing explanation. Is it race or class? But rather, this is how the system works to channel resources more so to some groups than others. But I think it's a useful exercise in part because it helps us understand, like, oh, if, for example, we were to change policies associated with education or wealth or something like that, what kind of health changes might we see? So I hope that helps that piece of the question a bit. Now, I think the harder question, not the silly one at all, are all health disparities across racial and ethnic groups, is it all racism? And in that sense, I would say no, but it's really an empirical answer. But let me give you an example of that. Is that there's, for example, there's been a longstanding finding that I alluded to in my talk a bit early on about higher life expectancy among Hispanic Americans compared with white Americans and Black Americans. And so part of that, there's been a number of people to look at that, what's been termed Hispanic paradox. And part of that has to do with like immigrant selectivity, who comes to the country, how did they get here, why did they come, and so forth. So there's that's an easy example that comes to mind. So I think it's now what happens after that, once immigrants come to either Canada or the United States or whatever, and kind of the social system in which they're embedded and the racism that takes place, what happens after that is kind of a different question. But without understanding that immigrant selectivity and kind of how people arrive in the first place, the explanations can't be full. So I would say no, but I think it's an important empirical question that we, as a scientific community, just have not dug into racism in the ways that I think I've tried to talk through in my talk, that we're finally starting to do in data sets like AdHealth and others.
Thank you very much for the question and the answer. I think we had a Tyler on site who wants to ask a question.
Okay, I'm in the frame. So hello, everybody, and thank you, Dr. Hummer, for your talk. My question was specific to examining intergenerational inequalities. It's something that really caught my eye as you were discussing your conceptual framework. What do you think are, or I guess, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges that comes to mind for you when we're trying to understand racial inequalities that span across intergenerations or generations? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, it's great to see you again. So I would say off the top of my head, two things. First, it's conceptualization. Even the fact that you asked the question is important, because I think a lot of people who would, whether they're scientists or lay folks or what, would not think about racial and ethnic disparities, would not think about in health or anything, and not think about them intergenerationally at all, but think about maybe current behaviors or current residential contexts or whatever. So even the fact that you think about that and can conceptualize that intergenerational transmissions are important. I think that's a big part of the battle there, is recognizing that the kind of resources that we bring to the table and the opportunities we have, constraints we have, are not just unfolding within our own lifetimes, but beyond that. So and for example, wealth transmission being one of those, when groups have far different access to resources of what we inherit from parents, based on racist policies, laws, so forth, that go back for decades and centuries, then that's an easy example to use with students and so forth. So I think just conceptualizing that and bringing that to the table is important. The second part of that, though, is the data. That in order to demonstrate that, we need data, both the conceptualization of like, what does, for example, wealth mean? You know, that part of it comes from your own job or whatever, but none of that is devoid of context of where, you know, schooling and parents and grandparents and so forth. But, you know, the data is important. So we have to think about intergenerational transmissions as well, parents, education, wealth, opportunities, parents' health, and so on. So I think it's both a conceptual question and an empirical question that effectively bringing intergenerational transmission to the table is critical.
Thank you. We do have another question here on site from Sophia. Do you want to come up?
I am too small. There. Hi, thank you very much for this really nice and interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I guess my question is going to be split in my question and a little bit of an anecdotal experience so that I can explain my question. So I feel that many of this research comes to the level of individual and macro level variables, but I was wondering whether it is possible to also measure things like stereotypes, because at the end, stereotypes are also playing a role in these health outcomes. So for example, some time ago, I learned about the case of Serena Williams, that is the tennis player, that when she gave birth to her first kid, she almost died in the hospital, because in the hospital, there was this stereotype of thinking that Black women tolerate pain more than white women. So they have less help when they are giving birth, and that puts them in risk of actually dying. So at the end, the outcome of many Black women dying when having a baby is mostly because of the stereotype. So I was wondering if this is something that can be measured based on the samples that are out there, and if it has been done, how it has been done. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Thank you.
Sophia, I should mention Sophia is also one of our fellows from the Max Planck Demographic Institute research. Demographic Institute for the Institute for Demographic Research. Got it. Sorry.
Okay, Max Planck. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Thank you for the question on stereotype. And so your point's very well taken. That I don't think we can focus only on the macro or only on the micro in better understanding these health disparities. At the type of situation that you described obviously unfolds at the individual level, patient, provider, trust, stereotypes, and so forth that can harm or harm people's health or end up with deaths and so forth. So stereotypes, of course, are important to measure at the individual level if we can. And data sets like AdHealth, and there are many others that try to do so, try to incorporate measures of individual level discrimination and stereotype into those into the data. That said, I also, but I do think there's limits there. That if we only focused at the individual level, we miss the larger context in which those stereotypes are structured and why they've unfolded. So so if we find, for example, that stereotypes are related to poor health, worse birth outcomes, higher mortality, what have you, at the individual level, that's important. But the intervention at that point then could also be to, for example, teach providers not to discriminate against their patients, or to try to coach groups into not stereotyping each other. So that's important, but it doesn't eliminate the possibility that these stereotype threats and actions are embedded within a larger system of why there are stereotypes in the first place. What causes you know, in the case you described physicians to stereotype against groups. So I think the, you know, at one level, having individual level data on, for example, stereotype is important, or individual level discrimination. But at another, and I think we've done a lot of that over the last 20 years or so in the US-based data sets that I'm familiar with. But where I think we've fallen well short is thinking beyond that in terms of the larger social systemic issues that are what I would describe as responsible for why there are stereotypes in the first place.
Thank you very much. So a testament to the complexity of these issues. And we did have also a question in the chat about, I think that brings back a little bit what Claire was asking, namely how are these long run processes embodied into poor health, or is it the current one? So I think there's a lot of frontiers. That's the message. There's data coming that will be able to answer some of these questions, but this is about you all also in the next generation that will carry this through in the study and also in the action, because CAnD3 is also about bringing data-driven decision-making to action. And I just want to note that in the chat here, personally to me, but also in everyone, there were a lot of decision makers or people supporting decision making amongst our partners that are in Canada that are picking this up as very, very interesting work, and hopefully that we'll be able to also carry this forward in other realms of impact. And so this brings us to the conclusion of our panel speaker session, but please stay on with us. We do have the next phase of the final concluding phase of this event, which will bring the focus, the spotlight back to the fellows about their posters, and also about some prize winning that our fellows have the awards that they won in terms of their data visualization. So first, please join me here in person and online in thanking our speaker, Bob. Thank you. Thank you so very much. This was, I couldn't have hoped for a better keynote speaker. The breadth and the width, the depth of what you covered is really, truly inspiring, and the kind of work that you're doing also with developing the data and developing for the whole community is something that we seek to emulate here at CAND3, and also support this kind of broad-ranging building of community. We convene, we collaborate, and we create capacity for better understanding aging societies. So thank you all very much. Again, stay on, please, for the next phase.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
I will turn it over now, sharing my screen. Thank you, Bob. And we will have you over back in Montreal for sure. There's just too many opportunities there. Okay, so moving to our fellows and alumni poster session. So we have posters on site, but also we thought that we would give the fellows, a couple of fellows, the opportunity to come up here and give a 2-minute super brief overview of their who they are and key findings, so that the audience online also can see them. And so we will be starting off with Tyler. So I invite you to the mics. So it's going to be in, sorry, I'm trying to remove this board here. It worked well before. There we go.
All right, well, I'm back. So hello again. I am very excited to be able to share this poster in person in Montreal, and also online for those of you who are attending for the next couple minutes or so. So this is building on my dissertation research, which looks to extend our understanding of the relationships between psychological resilience and physical health. And so the main finding in chapter 2 of my dissertation, illustrated here, is that early life structural conditions modify the physical health benefits associated with psychological resilience in adulthood. And in particular, I found that there are racial inequalities that emerge at higher levels of early life disadvantage. Now, to connect this to the talk we had just listened to, this would illustrate how racism emerges in the interrelationships between socioeconomic resources and physical health over the life course. I'm hoping to further extend this to better understand how these relationships might vary across social statuses, such as sex assigned at birth, and future socioeconomic resources. Again, thank you for your time. I know this was not 2 minutes, but I just wanted to give you a quick little synopsis. Thanks.
And for folks online in on-site, there's of course the real deal, Sophia.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Today, well, yes, my name is Sofia Gil-Clavel, and I am a PhD candidate at the Digital and Computational Laboratory of the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research. And I am also affiliated to the Faculty of Spatial Sciences at the University of Groningen. So in my poster, I will be talking about how to analyze EU15 immigrants' language acquisition using Twitter data. And just as I mentioned, the data that I used for this analysis comes from Twitter, and it was retrieved between January 2012 and December 2016. Then what I did was to use survival analysis to study the pace of language acquisition of the migrants. And then, well, so these are the results. And in this case, I focus on two important variables that are how liberalized the citizenship policies of the country of destination are, and how many civic integration requirements migrants have to fulfill, and how these two variables affect the pace until actually starting to tweet in the language of the country of destination. So if you want to learn more about this, just come to my poster. Thank you.
So next we have a first cohort, our pilot cohort. Sorry, I'm trying to remove this, but there we go.
Oh, okay, yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Emma. I'm a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. Yeah, I'm a little bit taller. Yeah, so my PhD focus is on trying to understand how environmental factors and genetic predispositions may drive cognitive health in older adults. Because of the variability of this older adult population, we focus on, or we try to use nonlinear methods to try to understand this relationship. And through an explainable boosting machine approach, we actually identified that there may be subtypes within the population that describe or may explain why a one-size-fits-all approach may not be suitable for the population. So yeah, that's a general overview of my poster. Feel free to come ask more questions or discuss. Thank you.
You guys are masters in brevity.
Hello everybody, my name is Daniel Tingskar. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Economics at McMaster University. So I'm presenting a chapter of my dissertation, Federal Economy of COVID-19, Public Health Measures. Essentially what I've done is I've estimated the benefits and the costs of COVID-19 lockdowns. The benefits are a rough estimate of the value of life years saved by each person if we go into a lockdown compared to no lockdowns. And then the costs account for the potential reduction in earnings from going to lockdowns, because when we implement these public health measures, economic activity slows down quite a bit. And so unemployment increases. You can't really see at the table there, but there's a discrepancy between age groups and also gender. Younger people are more likely to lose jobs during lockdowns than older people. And actually, it was slightly higher for females as well. I did also measure the reduction in leisure opportunities, because since during a lockdown, you're stuck at home and you can't go out and enjoy activities. So That was the other further stupidity, was the earnings and leisure. And the figures, they show the variation in the costs and benefits, the net costs and benefits by age groups. And there's a pretty steep decline. Younger people, the benefits are lower, costs are higher. But for other people, the benefits are higher in cost. So there's a discrepancy between the costs and benefits for age groups. All right, thank you.
Terrific. So this is just a sampling of our speakers, of our fellows and some of their research. And so now I know I gave it away. Sorry, I was going to have a momentous kind of pause to say now we are moving into the unveiling of the results of the Dragon's Den, which the quick among you saw, the sneak peek. So this was a long process that really culminated over several weeks, if not months, of the fellows putting together data visualizations based on their research or work that they did together. We had several formative sessions where we provided feedback, and we had especially some excellent support from Statistics Canada in helping us kind of bring this to fruition. And so the conclusion of that, we had the event that some of you may have attended on June 1st. So we invited the full group of CAnD3 to join us, and we had people rank the presentation, so with little stars. So the results that you see here are based both on the evaluations, the quantitative evaluations, as well as the judges' qualitative evaluations. And so without further ado, now that I've built this up enough, I will announce the Dragon's Den winners, who are Julia, Tyler, and the team of Clara, Jennifer, Melissa, and Ina. So congratulations. And special mentions for Elham on the clear background and significance of the research questions, and Sophia for the data visualization that enhanced the presentation. So on the top side, what you have is presentations that reach an average, cumulative average of more than 4.25 over the 5-point scale. And here on the special mentions, these two participants, these two presenters, had more than 4.5 on these particular elements, and they were picked out by the judges. So I will ask the winners to stand up so we can, all the winners and the special mentions to stand up so we can recognize them. Stay at your place. And so for folks online also to be able to see you and take a couple pictures there, and prize, your choice of prizes that consist of either a puzzle from some beautiful McGill old-timey kind of things, pictures that were brought up, or some books if you don't have room in your luggage for puzzles. So this will be, and we will have the formal and the picture taking in the other room, because our photographer asked us for a lovelier background than this one. And so this concludes our session today. Congratulations again to the winners. You have done a tremendous job over all of you. I just want to take back, to reiterate the words of Claudia Sanrate from CAND. This is the hardest stuff. You did in 2 minutes. You conveyed complex data visualizations that can support the data-driven decision making. This is the hard stuff. I hope you can take it, and all of these, I want to say, it were so meritorious, and we were splitting hairs, really, truly. And so it's just, again, we had to pick a benchmark, and this was it. But really, as far as I'm concerned, you're all winners, and there is swag for everybody. Just letting you know, that's for later. But before we end, I want to first give big thanks and a huge round of applause to the team, the CAnD3 operations team that sailed through this despite all the hurdles and the shoaly waters that we have experienced, that we're still experiencing. And so please join me in thanking them. It's really